It works, son of a gun. Good afternoon, everybody. Before we start, this was in the lobby. Does it belong to anyone here? Okay, it was in the parking lot? Anybody claiming it? Okay, all right.
I think it's for someone who it might be. Do you wear oxygen?
Okay.
Great.
Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to Bookmarks. On behalf of the Temple Sinai Library Committee, our board of directors, and our rabbis, we're so glad you could be with us this afternoon. And I did want to recognize all of the members of our library committee, I think most of whom are here today. If you are, just kind of raise your hands, and you'll also notice they're wearing a name badge. Marilyn Bowie, Pam Brandman, Maureen Leschendock, Renee Keir, Ronan Keir, Catherine Sweezy, Tanya Naroki, and Barbara Weinberg. This is Jewish Book Month, the month of November, and it originally started in 1925 when a librarian named Fanny Goldstein worked at the Boston Public Library and decided that there should be a book display out to help promote Jewish culture for Hanukkah. And here we are almost 100 years later, sitting in Reno, Nevada, celebrating Jewish Book Month. And we are doing it this year with our Bookmarks program. We try to run a Bookmarks program at least twice a year here at the library. Last year, November 6th was our first one. And the author at that time was David Slater, who wrote a book called The Vanishing. And here we are a year later, and we're going to have Claire Stanford joining us, but I will not introduce her because that will be our moderator who will do that. I wanted to recognize Jewish Nevada for being our sponsor for this event for Jewish Book Month. I'm representing Jewish Nevada is their community engagement coordinator, Mara Langer. And so let me ask Mara to come up and say a few words, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Jill. So thank you all for coming here. As she said, my name is Mara Langer, and I am the director. I got a promotion. It's okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I am the director of community engagement for Jewish Nevada. Most of you know what Jewish Nevada is, but for those of you who don't, we are a statewide federation that services the over 70,000 Jews here in Nevada. I am in charge of everything from programming to fundraising to events and pretty much everything else you can think of in between. If you're interested in participating in an event, or if you're interested in an event you want to see here in our community, please let me know. We do have a mailing list that I'm happy to have you join. We have hikes. We have a couple of upcoming events. We have a hike on January 19th. And they just did a hike on Friday, actually, up and had a spiritual connection during the hike. And so I encourage everybody who can do it to get out there and hike. And then we also, on December 5th, John Farahi, our very generous local philanthropist, has gotten the rights to show Upheaval by Menachem Begin, the Menachem Begin documentary. And it's going to be at the Atlantis. Doors open at 6:30 and the show starts at 7. So I know several of you are already registered for that, but just wanted to let you know of those two things. And there's more information on the table outside. I also want to tell you some of the things that we are actually doing during this time. I know that it is a very somber time for all of us. And while we're in this time of introversion and thought and processing, it's really important for all of us to still come together and gather. And that's what we're doing today. And I just appreciate Jill and the library committee for putting this together. Something else that Jewish Nevada has done is I was honored to be able to take 9 Hillel students statewide to the Walk for Israel on the Washington Mall. It was a crazy 36 hours of travel and intention, but the students were awesome, and I was so grateful to be a part of that. We had a visual right after the war started where 250 people came out to come together and to lean on each other. And I'm hoping in the coming days that I can announce other things that we're doing to bring our community closer together. But I also just wanted to take a moment and share a piece that was sent to me actually by Rabbi Ben. And I just think it's the right thing to say during this time. So if you'll indulge me. It's called Peace, Please by Rabbi Karen Ketter. We gather together in faith and with hope to pray for peace and for the safety of the people of Israel and of us here in America. Help us, O Holy One, and protect us in our hour of need. Touch our hearts, lest they harden with despair. Guide our thoughts, lest they are overcome with fear. Bring healing to the wounded, strength to those in mourning, courage to those in fear, and wisdom to those who lead. Yeched Nefesh, beloved one, reveal yourself and fill the world with your light. Spread over us the shelter of your peace. Be quick, God of love, for the time has come. Have mercy upon us, eternal one of peace.
Just a quick housekeeping. If your cell phones are on, please silence them. The restrooms are right across the lobby. And following the event, we'll be having refreshments and book signing and meet our author in the main library. For those of us joining us online, welcome. And we look forward to hearing your remarks or comments as the afternoon progresses. And for those of you who do not know our rabbi, Rabbi Benjamin Zober is here with us today. And we welcome him. And again, we thank our board of directors. So with that, I'd like to introduce our library committee member, Tanya Naroki. And she's going to take it from here. And I think we're going to be having a very enlightening afternoon. So Tanya.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome. So on behalf of the Temple Sinai Library Committee, I'm thrilled to introduce Claire Stanford. So she's the author of Happy For You, which was named a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice. She's also an assistant professor at the University of Nevada for the Creative Writing Program. Today, she will be reading selections from her novel, and we will follow with a Q&A session. And as Jill just mentioned, as a reminder, we have Ilya here from the Radical Cat, who will be selling copies of Happy For You, and Claire will be available to sign those afterwards as well. All right. Yeah.
Thanks so much to all of you for being here. Thanks so much to Temple Sinai and the Temple Sinai Library Committee for inviting me and organizing this wonderful event. I'm so excited to be here. And also, I'm echoing Tanya. Thanks to Ilya from Radical Cat and Radical Cat for being here to sell books when we're done with the reading and Q&A. And I'd be happy to sign, of course. And thank you, Tanya, for that wonderful introduction. This is also just one of the most beautiful places I've ever read. So I'm so thrilled to be here. This is such a nice setup here. So especially for Q&A afterward. So I thought I would read 3 different sections of the book. So I'm going to open with the very beginning, so it'll become clear pretty immediately who the narrator is and kind of what the premise of the book is. But basically, the narrator is a woman named Evelyn Kaminsky Kumamoto. She's in her early 30s. She's half Japanese and half Jewish, which is the same background I have, although some things in her background are flipped. And lots of things in her biography are not the same as my autobiography, but this is kind of drawing on some of the selections I'm going to be drawing on are kind of related to, my experiences growing up, going to Hebrew school and being bat mitzvahed and also being a person of color. But the first section is just the opening of the book. And I thought that would just give you an idea about the book's main concerns, which are kind of with happiness. What does it mean to be happy? And particularly, what does it mean for this narrator, Evelyn, who's at a critical juncture in her life? She's as I said, in her early 30s. She's trying to decide what to do with her life in terms of her job and her work. She's also trying to decide in terms of her relationship, whether to get married. This isn't really a spoiler, but, because also we're going to get there in the book, but in the reading, but, she eventually becomes pregnant and is a little ambivalent about it and deciding what to do about that. So there's just a lot of pressures on her. And as you will see, the job that she embarks on in this very opening chapter is going to pressurize that even more. So I'll start with just this opening, and then I'm going to read a few other sections. When I went to my interview at the third most popular internet company, I tried to make myself look like a real person. I bought a suit and put it on my body. My interviewer was a woman around my age who appeared to also be half Asian. I couldn't determine what kind of half Asian she was, nor did I mention the fact that we were both half Asian. Neither did she, though for her to mention it during a job interview would probably have been illegal. The project, she said, was happiness. Happiness, I said? Happiness, she said. They wanted to understand it, to measure it, to help their users grow it like a muscle that could be toned. They were looking to add out-of-the-box thinkers. She asked me what I thought I could contribute. I told her about my wide-ranging philosophical grounding, my study of the mind-body problem, of the theory of emotions. These were the phrases I used, phrases I had practiced in the mirror the day before. She nodded, making a note. I see you haven't finished your PhD, she said. Not quite, I said. She nodded and made another note. Why do you want to work here? Why leave academia? This was the question I had practiced the most. I want the work I do to matter. I want to do something tangible, to be part of something that affects people's daily lives, that improves them. She asked me more questions. I gave her more answers. I came back for more interviews, met more people, sat in more conference rooms, talked more about my research. A few days later, I got the call that I was hired. The third most popular internet company occupied a building downtown that was all metal and glass. In the lobby, an enormous sculpture hung from the ceiling. It was brightly colored and abstract, meant, I thought, to confer liveliness and excitement onto its otherwise sterile environment. I pressed the employee ID I had gotten at orientation to the scanner at the security turnstile and waited the requisite split second for the light to flash green. At the orientation, I had filled out paperwork for my health insurance, which, though I was a contractor, was still surprisingly excellent. I had taken a tour of the building, gotten my photo taken and my security badge printed, picked up my company-issued laptop, and met with a few members of the team I would be working with, none of whose names I remembered except for the head of the project, Alethea Luce, who would be my boss. She was in her mid-40s and enormously tall, easily over 6 feet, with curly red hair that went down to her shoulder blades. She wore a pair of thick-rimmed glasses that made her look extremely fashion-forward, though it was not clear to me whether they were a conscious style choice. She had a PhD in neurochemistry, and I was basically in awe of her. She had sat in on several rounds of my interviews, asking questions that were difficult and provocative, nodding intently as I gave my answers. I had read up on her research when I was interviewing for the job. Her dissertation argued that emotions were physical processes triggered by external stimuli. Her work advanced the claim that each emotion was housed in a specific location in the brain, and that once that location was found, the emotion could be targeted much more effectively by medication, by electrotherapy, by an array of other interventions. This was a controversial stance. Studies had shown that a group of people would say that they were all experiencing the same emotion, anger, for example, but MRIs of their brains would show entirely different regions lighting up. The truth was that emotions were still an utter unknown in philosophy and psychology and neurochemistry. I took the elevator to the 7th floor and stepped out onto the open office space. I looked at the rows of clean white tables, the ergonomic mesh chairs, the sleek computers, many already whirring with the day's work. Our desks were not assigned, and looking out at the open seats felt not unlike trying to choose a spot in the cafeteria as the new girl at school. Somehow they hadn't covered this detail in orientation. Just then a woman came up to me, a broad smile on her face. "Evelyn, right?" I nodded. "I'm Sabine," she said, sticking out her hand. I clasped it with my own. The woman looked like she was a couple of years younger than me. Her face was dewy and bright, and a small diamond stud sparkled on the left side of her nose. She was very petite and just shorter than me, but I could tell already that she had a big presence. She appeared to be South Asian. "I knew a new person was coming today, and you look just lost enough," she said. "We're in the same research group. Come on, I'll show you where we sit." I followed her to a far corner of the office where a white man a few years older than me was sitting. He had curly black hair and wore glasses with clear frames. He looked slightly disheveled, but in a way that I suspected might be more crafted than accidental. "This is Josh," Sabine said. "He's also part of the emotions research team. It's the three of us now." "Welcome, welcome," Josh said. He turned from his screen to shake my hand and then immediately went back to the document he was working on. "He's in the middle of something," Sabine said. "Anyway, it's open office, but we basically sit here. You can take this desk. It's next to mine." She motioned to an empty workspace across from Josh. I put my bag on the desk she had pointed to, and we sat down in neighboring chairs. "Philosophy, right?" she said. I must have looked at her quizzically. "You're a philosophy PhD, right?" "How did you know that?" I asked. "Oh, we know everything about you, right, Josh?" From the other side of the computers, Josh made an assenting sound. "I heard you haven't finished," she said. "That's pretty rare. They must have really wanted you." "I guess so," I said. "I don't know." I asked her about her background. "Sociology," she said. "I mostly do quantitative user experience research, but some qualitative. Basically, it means how people are using the product, what they want from the product, what they need from the product." She went on telling me about software stacks and development servers, standardized markdowns, and open source programs. I didn't understand much of it, but I figured I would soon. Josh, she said, had a PhD in psychology. He mostly worked on meta-analysis of users' emotional fluctuations. "We've never had a philosopher before," she said. "What's your specialty?" I told her I worked on the mind-body problem. Before I could explain it, she nodded knowingly. "Ah," she said, "I thought you were going to be an ethics person. That's what we both thought, right, Josh?" The same assenting sound came from behind the monitor. "An ethics person is what they really need around here," she went on, "but those decisions are above my pay grade." She must have sensed my discomfort because she hurried to add that she was sure I'd have a lot to contribute to the team. "Oh, I almost forgot," she said, opening a drawer at her workstation. "HR dropped these off for you." She handed me a long rectangular cardboard box that was surprisingly heavy. Inside was a sheaf of business cards. Everything else at the third most popular internet company was digital, of course, but the cards were a throwback, printed with raised letters on heavy cardstock. I ran my hand along their top ridges, watched them flip forward and backward. I pulled a single card out of the box and traced the letters of my name with my finger. It read, Evelyn Kaminsky-Kumamoto, researcher. A company, and not just any company, but the third most popular internet company, a company that was globally recognized, even if it was not globally dominant, had decided to invest in me, to present me with these thick cards with these raised letters, to give me this desk space and a shiny new computer with a screen so large it dwarfed my body. I looked at the card in my hand. It didn't feel real. That afternoon was our first team meeting. I went with Sabine and Josh to a large glass-walled conference room where the other employees who had been summoned were assembling. Designers, programmers, engineers, copywriters. The meeting room was large and airy, its outer wall composed of floor-to-ceiling glass windows that looked out over the bay. And as we waited for the meeting to start, I watched the sailboats skimming across the water, bending low to the waves, their decks cutting almost perpendicular to its surface. The room was filled with a whispered excitement. It was the official launch of the Happiness Project and the project I had been hired to work on, but no one knew much more beyond that. The glass door swooshed open and whispering immediately quieted. Dr. Luce entered. Even though everyone else at the third most popular internet company went by their first names, apparently Dr. Luce insisted on being called Dr. Luce. Standing at the front of the room, Dr. Luce picked up a remote and clicked a button. The screen behind her lit up. After a moment, the words, "How to measure happiness," appeared. "I'm very pleased to introduce our newest product focus," she said. She paused for a beat, looking around at us, her audience. I tried to look engaged, attentive, ready to contribute. "The premise is simple," she continued. "None of us, not a single one of us, truly knows how happy we are. Some of us fool ourselves into thinking we are happy, when a few small changes might bring us real happiness. Others of us have convinced ourselves that happiness is out of reach, when in fact, we may be in the top 10th percentile of happiness and not even know it. If a simple algorithm could tell you how happy you were, objectively how happy, wouldn't you want to know? And why shouldn't we? We have algorithms that tell us what books we will like, which TV shows we should watch, which groceries to buy. We have algorithms that tell us traffic patterns and weather forecasts, when to buy plane tickets and when to sell stocks, even who will win the World Series. These algorithms make our lives better, more seamless. The research is a natural progression. Who wouldn't want to know if they are truly happy? Around me, my fellow employees were scribbling notes. My notepad was blank. I could not imagine how an algorithm could capture something as complicated and ephemeral as happiness. How could a concept philosophers had struggled over centuries to even define be compressed into numbers and functions? I suppose that was what I was at the third most popular internet company to learn. I should write something, I thought. I wrote, "Happiness equals World Series." I thought for a minute, and then I added on the next line, "Happiness equals seamless life." "This project is very important to me," Dr. Lewis continued. "I believe it's no less than the future of the company. And if we don't do it, someone else is going to. You can bet on that. There are other research labs working on this right now. There's money in emotions, you know, a lot of money. If we know what emotion the user is experiencing when they are using our platform, we can predict their behavior to the nth degree, what they'll click on, what they'll buy. Everyone wants to be happier, so that's where we're starting, happiness. But happiness is just the beginning." She clicked another button and the screen changed to a list of numbers and measurements: body temperature, skin temperature, cortisol levels, dopamine levels, facial musculature, pupil dilation. These biometrics, she said, were one way we would build a measure for happiness. "The other way is where our researchers come in," she said, looking at me and Sabine and Josh. She wanted us to come up with a prototype for a self-assessment. We couldn't just ask the user if they were happy or if they thought they were happy. We had to make it more detailed. What questions should we ask? How would we word the questions? And what scale should we use to measure their responses? That was up to the three of us. "They are our experts," she said. "They'll have full intellectual freedom in crafting the assessment." I wrote, "Being happy versus thinking you are happy. Are these the same?" "Our mission is to locate and improve happiness," Dr. Lewis said, concluding. "Any questions?" I wrote, "Where is happiness located? Where did happiness live? Head, heart, lung, liver, small intestine? Wherever it was somewhere interior, somewhere pink and squishy, somewhere pulsing with blood and cells and spleen, somewhere uncontrollably repulsive, somewhere immeasurably delicate. It would not last long if brought to the surface." So that's kind of an entry to the novel and to what the project is that Evelyn's going to be working on. And then I thought I would read a little shorter section, but it's one of my favorite sections in the book. It's about Evelyn's best friend, Sharky. I really, really love this character. He threatened to take over the book at multiple points and had to be controlled. And this is actually one of the very first things I wrote that turned into this book, and thinking about Evelyn as I had been playing around with lots of different ways of writing Evelyn, and this was really what brought me to deciding to write Evelyn kind of closer to my own background of being half Jewish and half Asian. So Sharky, like Evelyn, is half Jewish and half Asian. And Evelyn has a lot of questions about her background and how it inflects the way she kind of moves through the world, and how it inflects the way people treat her, her experience of the world. And Sharky is very different than that. He's much more secure in this background than she is in this identity. So I just love the way that, as you'll see in the scene, he really sees her, he really recognizes her, and she feels really comfortable with him right away. And they're beginning college on the East Coast, where there are even fewer people that look like her. This was also my experience going to college on the East Coast. And so it just is a really meaningful kind of beginning to a friendship for the two of them, that they can bond over this background at the start of their freshman year. So they've been walking through the city of San Francisco, and this is kind of her remembering how they met. I had met Sharky on the first day of college when we were randomly assigned to the same orientation group. We sat cross-legged on the leaf-strewn New England ground in what Sharky would later repeatedly refer to as a liberal arts feelings circle. "Tell us something about yourself," said our group leader, a junior still suffering from wretched acne. "Only what you feel comfortable sharing." A few people introduced themselves, giving their name, their place of origin, a fun fact. The introductions moved quickly around the circle, each of us giving only a few details, each of us still deciding who we were going to be in this new place. That is, until we got to a boy sitting across from me. His full name was Sharuk Bakherjee Teitelbaum, he said, but everyone called him Sharky. Born and raised in Nashville, an origin that registered mild surprise on a few faces, given that he was distinctly South Asian in appearance, though maybe not entirely South Asian, possibly South Asian with something else mixed in. Surprised that, given that this was a good liberal arts feeling circle, and of course all kinds of people could be from all kinds of places, everyone hastened to cover up. He played basketball, point guard. His high school team, he said, with a slight Southern accent, though his rapid-fire speech left little room for drawl, had been state champions 4 years in a row and Southeast champions his junior and senior years. Here was where everyone else had left off, but Sharky kept going. He loved fried pickles and country music, and he defied anyone to name a musician superior to Hiram King Williams, better known as Hank. He was the youngest of 6 children, all boys, all lawyers or in law school, but he wanted to be a filmmaker, documentaries, more or less blank than Werner Herzog. Here he did what I would later realize was a Werner Herzog impression, severe, heavy, Germanic, but at the time, neither I nor any of my other seemingly worldly peers recognized it. He had made his first feature film when he was 12 and had made 8 more since then. He was working on casting his next one, he said, looking around the circle meaningfully, taking in each person's face as if any of us were interested in auditioning. His top 3 favorite films other than documentaries were The Big Sleep, Chinatown, and Double Indemnity. He was a lover of noir. Still, his parents said that they wouldn't pay for him to go to college just to watch all the movies he'd already watched all over again, many of them for the 10th or 20th time. And so he was majoring in economics, which he thought was basically the most boring subject possible. No offense to other econ majors or potential econ majors out there. But he was thinking he would just make a boatload of money in the first few years after college and use it to finance his first feature film. He paused for a second and looked like he was simply gathering his thoughts, but the pimpled group leader jumped in and thanked him for sharing, nodding encouragingly at the next face in the circle. The introductions continued on, moving from one quirky high achiever to the next, everyone besides Sharky saying only a sentence. When this was done, the group leader left us to talk amongst ourselves until our next scheduled activity. Talking amongst ourselves was an area in which I did not excel, though I did excel at looking off into the middle distance and pretending I didn't notice no one was talking amongst themselves with me. I was just beginning to lengthen my gaze and let it fuzz when a face appeared at short range. Sharky, the South Asian appearing film noir Hank Williams, fried pickle loving point guard from Nashville. "Jubu," he said. "Excuse me," I said. His eyes were wide and eager. "Jew-boo," he said again, enunciating each syllable. "You know, Jewish Buddhist, like me, half Jewish, half Indian. Hebrew school, bar mitzvah, the whole deal. Torah portion was Noah and the flood." I had never met another half Jewish, half Asian person. "Evelyn Kaminsky Kumamoto," I said, half Jewish, half Japanese. Torah portion was Moses parting the Red Sea. I stuck out my hand to shake, but he intercepted it with a fist bump. "How did you know?" "I've got Jew Budar," he said. From then on, we were inseparable. So that was actually, although Evelyn and I have many differences, my Torah portion was also Moses parting the Red Sea. And so then the last little section I'm going to read is just Evelyn remembering, speaking of her Torah portion, thinking back to her bat mitzvah. So, of course, this is heavily fictionalized, but it is drawing on my experience of growing up going to Hebrew school, my experience of my own bat mitzvah, which was a really meaningful experience in my life. I grew up in Berkeley, so I went to synagogue there. And it becomes clear over the course of this section, but just so you know, at this point in the book, you already know as the reader that her mother passed away when she was 14. So it's the year after her bat mitzvah, obviously. And her mother is the person who is Jewish and her father is Japanese American. And so then also by this point in the novel, as I said, not to be a spoiler, but Evelyn is pregnant, and she and her long-term boyfriend, Jamie, have planned on keeping the baby, but she's a little ambivalent about it. So she's also thinking about her mother a lot right now because she missed these kind of critical years with her mother, and now she's going to become a mother. And so she's reflecting back on this. So I'll just read this last section thinking about this, and then I think we'll open up for Q&A. By the time I had my bat mitzvah, my mother was already sick. She didn't know it yet, but the cells were dividing and mutating inside her, chromosomes and chromatids and malignancies. On the day of my bat mitzvah, she wore a suit embroidered with fake pearls that looked nicer than it sounds. As she stood on the bima and she blessed me, her daughter, the Hebrew words flowing easily out of her mouth, a lifetime of synagogue and sidurim embedded in her tongue. There was an old VHS tape of the service that I'd watched from time to time in the years after she died. My mother in her pearl suit, so beautiful, so unaware, her body no longer her own. For years when I would watch the tape, I would look for signs of what was to come, for any hint of vulnerability. And I would look at my own face, the eager face of a 13-year-old just beginning to grow into her new body. I wore a matching blue velvet shirt and skirt combo that looked just as terrible as it sounds. But I felt beautiful in it, and that shows on the tape too, in the way I walk up to the bima, and the swish of my hips, a little swish that I did not yet know how to do, that I never quite learned how to do, but that in that moment I was practicing. I was trying at adulthood. Over the course of the following year, I watched my mother fade away. It was more violent than that at the time. My mother had the best doctors, the best care, but the cancer was powerful and fierce. And her body just couldn't fight it. But the way I remembered it was like a picture being slowly erased, only the smudges of the pencil lead left behind on the page, traces of her image, her eyes, her hands, her ears that were always too large for her head. We did not take any pictures during that year, no videos. But wasn't her sickness part of her life too? It was 1/14 of the time I knew her, 1/10 or so of the time I was cognizant of knowing her. Weren't there times in that year worth remembering? When I was in my second year of my PhD program, I had the VHS converted to DVD for safekeeping. Is a DVD really safer than a VHS? They're both just objects, somehow imprinted with one's memories. I took the tape to one of those stores with the sign VHS to DVD down on Geary. All the shop did was convert VHS to DVD per the sign, and I wondered how large the market could possibly be for its services. Was there an army of people out there with these memories that they needed to save, that they needed to survive? I handed my VHS to a teenager who inspired little confidence, and 5 business days later, I no longer had only one copy of my most precious memory, but 2. On the bat mitzvah tape, my father reads a prayer too. I remember him practicing it night after night, struggling through the transliteration, trying to make his mouth make the ch sound of chet, of challah and Hanukkah, but ch is a sound that comes from the throat, a deep rasping best taught in childhood. He was never going to be able to get it by moving his lips, and why were there so many H's anyway, he would ask when they were all silent. My mother liked to tell the story of my father's attempt to convert, how he had had the bad luck to get a traditional rabbi, one set on the old custom of turning away a potential convert 3 times. My father didn't know and wouldn't accept my mother's explanation after the rabbi called to cancel their first meeting at the last minute. He never set up a second meeting, and certainly not a third. And yet, he was the one who picked me up at school and drove me to Hebrew school on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, and picked me back up at the temple at 6 when classes let out, the 2 of us listening to NPR in silence. My mother was the one who insisted I go, but her schedule was not her own to control, whereas my father could arrange for 1 less tooth cleaning, a few less cavities to fill. He never once came in, never attended services, only set foot in the synagogue the day of my bat mitzvah. My mother always took high holidays off. That, at least, was allowed by her firm. And so it was that she would go with me, would sing the Shema and the Ve'ahavta, would stand beside me, rocking up to the balls of her feet 3 times during the Amidah, Kadosh, 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 holy, 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 would press the corners of her talit to the Torah scroll as it came around and then press them to her mouth in a sacred kiss, would hold her arm around my shoulders and show me how to do the same, urging me forward into the heritage she felt was mine, by blood and by right, no matter that all the faces that looked back at us in the synagogue were white and my face was something else, not white, but not white either. That had been the deal when the Kaminsky family's only daughter had announced that she was marrying a Japanese man, that the little Japanese Jewish children would be brought up in the temple, would be bar and bat mitzvahed. There had only been one child, but my parents had kept their end of the bargain. No matter how much I tried to get them to let me stay home, it was no use. I always found myself in the same plastic chair in the same makeshift classroom at the temple, reciting the same Hebrew lines, trying to master the difficult melody of the Haftarah, practicing my Torah portion over and over again, the vowelless words swimming in and out of comprehensibility on the scroll before me. But somewhere along the way, the deal had been perverted. Somehow my mother's body had misunderstood the terms. It seemed as though it had thought that once the little Japanese Jewish child was bat mitzvahed, it was no longer needed, that its job was complete. And I think I'll end there. Thank you so much for being here for the reading.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me okay? No? Okay. So before I open it up for Q&A, I wanted to ask you, so I recently read your article on LitHub, and you talked about glitches in the online systems where you cannot choose both Japanese and white when you were filling out a questionnaire, I believe, to see the doctor. So I was hoping you could tell us more about why you wanted to write about the tech algorithm and why you wanted to critique the rigid categories that it offers.
That's a great question, and thank you for reading the LitHub essay. The essay, and it's in the book too, kind of jumps off from also, and I think lots of people have experienced this. When I was a kid, I used to have to take standardized tests all the time. And when you take a standardized test, the very beginning, you like bubble in your name and your age and whatever. And then you also, at least when I was like 8 and 9 years old, had to bubble in your race. And it was just not allowed, as a pencil bubbling, to bubble in both Asian and white. And I would end up having to bubble in next to other. And I just think, looking back at the time, it felt completely like, okay, this is just what I'm supposed to be doing. But when I look back now, I'm like, think it's kind of horrifying that whoever was designing these tests was asking children to self-identify as other, as kind of like not even fully human or not kind of identifiable or legible. So that's something I'm really exploring in that essay and in this book. So Evelyn has, she's grown up with very similar experiences. That is kind of drawn from my autobiography. And then she has a moment actually in the book where she is doing the kind of beta test questionnaire for the app they end up designing. And she, again, can't choose both Asian American and white. She has to choose other. So yeah, just to kind of make a more general kind of point about that is that it was something I was just really, interested in exploring in the book, kind of more generally in the way that someone who's never felt like easy to classify or categorize, which is Evelyn, because of her racial and ethnic background, but also because she's a philosophy graduate student in her early 30s, and a lot of her friends have settled down and have, well-paying jobs and are buying houses. She's been in a long-term relationship, but she's not getting married, and she's not sure whether she wants to be a mother. So there are all these ways that I think she feels out of kind of the normal system of things. And then when she joins this tech company, the algorithms of Joyful just really pressurize that for her. And she has to start making some actually more active decisions about whether she's going to support the work that this tech company is doing and trying to like overcategorize, oversimplify kind of the most complex and unsimplifiable of emotions, happiness, but all emotions being complex and unsimplifiable. And I wanted to do as a tech kind of story to begin with, because I felt personally that tech was really infringing on my life in a lot of ways. At the time that I was starting to write this, I started writing it in 2015. So, I started writing in kind of a still tech optimistic time. I think we're a lot more tech pessimistic now, but I felt that all around me, everyone was being so just optimistic about the possibilities of tech to revolutionize politics, revolutionize identity. And it didn't feel that way to me as someone who was feeling like really pressured by a lot of different algorithmic things, particularly the kind of view of life that was being approved for women my age on Instagram that got like likes books and things on Facebook. And I also just wanted to explore the idea that, I think it's a present undercurrent in my book that the world of tech is really run primarily by white men of a certain kind of socioeconomic class and education and able-bodied, heterosexual. And what does this end up meaning for the way that these apps are designed and who is included and who's even thought of? Like if someone who is biracial was designing these drop-down menus, they would work that you could select more than one option on these drop-down menus, and you wouldn't have to select other. And so it's a subtle kind of undercurrent through the book that Evelyn is also kind of pushing against the system of how tech is trying to push you into these like very simplified boxes. And something that I found really gratifying since the book came out is not gratifying in the sense that I wish other people didn't feel this way, but gratifying in the sense that I've connected with a lot of readers over feeling, like they don't fit into these boxes that different surveys are asking them to do, that different tech apps are asking them to do. And so it's not always the case, or even, usually the case that they're half Asian and half Jewish per se, but that lots and lots of people feel, I really think everyone feels in some way that these really oversimplified categories don't apply to them, and that yet we're forced to oversimplify our identities to make ourselves kind of legible in this really, increasingly app-driven society. So that's really, one of the main things that she is wrestling with. And it's really drawn, I think, from kind of my whole history of wrestling with that too. Yes, thanks, Tanya, for the question. I know Tanya has more questions, but if folks in the audience have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes. Yeah. Or do you want me to?
If you say she will repeat the.
Oh yeah, I can repeat it.
Okay, I have no idea how you can answer this without the spoiler alert.
Okay.
But since we have you here, I'm really interested in how did you make the decision of how to end?
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, so you read the book. Thank you. Okay, the question was, how did I make the decision of how to end the book without giving a spoiler alert? Which was funny because I don't think that my book has a lot of plot spoilers because it's a very introspective, very interior book. But I do feel like the end is very important to that. And like often when I'm reading really introspective books, that are really a lot more about I really think of the struggle in this book, or the conflict in this book. It's an internal struggle, an internal conflict. There isn't really an antagonist in this book. Even Dr. Luce, who's the closest to being antagonist, really has some very human moments throughout the book and isn't clearly a villain or a conflict source for Evelyn. Like Evelyn's conflict is internal and is really about trying to find her place in the world. So I always, without giving away exactly what the ending is, at least after halfway, maybe more, less of the way through the book, I knew what the image was going to be that the book was going to end on. And that was just really, really clear in my head what was going to be the final ending action for Evelyn and the final thing she was going to be seeing and kind of engaging with. So then, in a sense, I was writing toward that, and kind of in a more in a less spoilery way, I can talk more concretely about, what I'm hoping the ending does is that Evelyn hasn't necessarily felt like she fits in by the end of the book, but she's realized by the end of the book that she doesn't need to fit in. And she is much more accepting and much more content with being a complex individual person who doesn't fit into these apps and categories and things like that. So I think that was also part of the arc that I envisioned for her. But yeah, we can always talk. You and I can always talk one-on-one about the ending if you want, without spoiling it too much. Are there any other questions? Yes.
There's a part in the book where Evelyn meets Paul on a plane to the museum, and he runs the mules, right? And he's teaching her about what mules are, and he sees them as very positive. The mix between horses and donkeys, and says, like that, he is also a mix. He says, I think of it as hybrid vigor.
Mhm.
And so in discussions about being biracial, there's often seems more talk about the negative, how difficult it is to fit in.
Mhm.
You don't have a category that you're other. But he sees it in this very positive way,
Mhm.
hybrid vigor. So in your experience, how is hybrid vigor, how do you experience that? Is that part of your life as well?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm so amazed people have already read the book and read it so carefully. So the question, just to repeat it, was that toward the end of the book, Evelyn is on a plane with another biracial person who's half Asian, Hawaii, and he's a mule breeder, and he talks about how mules are hybrid animals and how he admires them and likes working with them because they have hybrid vigor. I mean, this is definitely something I was thinking about a lot in the book, and I agree that talking about mixed race often is about the negatives. And for me, I have felt at times like I didn't fit in, but I also feel that I get so much from getting to have a Jewish father and a Japanese American mother and having both sides of the family. And, I was accepted at my temple, and I went to Hebrew school 2, 3, 4 times a week because I went from kindergarten to 8th grade and was bat mitzvahed. But at the same time, I celebrate Japanese New Year with my mother, and we do a big spread. I think that that's just really wonderful. And it has, I think, set me up and set lots of folks up to also just see kind of, have an even more expansive kind of experience of life. But then I also think what's important in that scene, and important kind of for the ending of the book is like the final third of the book takes place in Hawaii. And it's just Hawaii, for those of you who have been there or those who haven't been there, it's just a completely different place to be a half Asian or mixed Asian person because it's much more the norm in Hawaii than it is in the continental United States. And so Evelyn goes to Hawaii and then is just experiencing a completely different way of being in the world and being seen. And she's experiencing a world where hybrid vigor can be seen as this really positive thing that's part of almost everyone's life in this state or in this place. And doesn't feel so kind of ostracized. Though meantime, she is kind of at this extremely white resort where people are still kind of asking her a lot of, where are you from? Pointed questions. But then she's seeing that out in the world of Hawaii, there's this other way of being. And Paul and the mules and the hybrid vigor is kind of part of that, I think, is kind of puncturing her understanding of what it's like to be a half Asian person in the world. Thank you for the question. I think there was, go ahead. Yes.
That and it's fascinating when you talk about science as well as emotion and is it important, is it not important? You brought in a lot of questions. Interesting topic.
Yeah.
What drew you to that topic?
So the question was what drew me to writing about happiness. And I mean, I think that what really drew me to it was this just feeling I had. I still have it, but I've, exorcised it to some extent. But especially in the 2010s, that there's this kind of happiness industrial complex growing in the United States. So like, one, that it's people's own responsibility to make themselves happy, which, maybe it is to some extent, but is also a way of covering up the fact that there are different structural problems going on in the country. And so instead kind of encouraging people, and especially women in their 20s and 30s, to purchase lots of products in order to make themselves happy. And so that was something I really wanted to engage with. And just the idea of happiness being this kind of oppressive emotion that I felt like is being really pushed on everyone right now, at least in America. And there's a scene that I didn't read out loud where Evelyn is telling her father, who was born in Japan, and then he comes over to the United States very young, which mimics kind of my mother's background. She tells him about her new project, and he says to her, happiness is such a American idea. And there is like a lot of proof that, different countries around the world experience the idea of happiness completely differently. And particularly in East Asia. In East Asia, people will rate their happiness very, very low. But that's very inconclusive what this means, because we don't really have a good understanding of what happiness means to a completely different culture. So that was just something else that I was really interested in. It's another way that Evelyn is feeling. I wanted to kind of get into these much bigger questions about happiness. and then it's another way that Evelyn is feeling really pressurized, that she feels, the world, but especially technology, is telling her you can only be happy if you do these certain things that are really in line with the way that U.S. society expects, women in their early 30s to behave, like have a well-paying job, marry someone, buy a house, have a child. And there's nothing wrong with those things, but for Evelyn, they're not necessarily her goals. So that's really something she's grappling with, about having been someone who her whole life feels out of place and wanting to fit in. And there are these things that are clear markers of how you fit in, and yet she still is so resistant to them. And so she's working through, I think, all of those questions, and happiness is pushing that. So one of my favorite sections in the book too is she goes to a happiness conference, and it's like the Global Happiness Summit. This is based on an actual conference, so you can look it up. But and some of the things that happen to her at the happiness conference are real. She goes in this float tank and she has a real experience there to some degree. And other things are these really commercialized versions of happiness. So that's another tension for her, and tension in the book between whatever real happiness is, which to me would be something more like intellectual fulfillment, community, helping other people, mutual aid, and what we're kind of being sold as what happiness is at this kind of moment in the United States. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, yeah, maybe in the front and then back there. Mm. Thank you for that question. Because I love the misfits in the book, which I'll explain in a second. But the question was that I brought in a lot of nature, and how did I do that research? So the main parts, I think, that are nature are the Misfits Animals, which is a TV show that Evelyn happens across, which is based on a show that's on PBS, and I credit it in the acknowledgements, that I happened across. And I don't know, when you're writing a book, it's like everything is synchronicity. Like you're thinking so much about the book, and then everything that starts happening starts like feeling in line with what you're writing. And I just turned on the TV and this show was on. It wasn't called Misfits. I named it that. So I just got really interested in this show, and I just thought it was such a perfect match for Evelyn's kind of world, because she gets very obsessed with this show that's about the non-charismatic kind of creatures in the animal world, and the ones who aren't kind of doing things in like the normal way. So it's about, seahorses where the male seahorse gives birth, or, animals who have very different mating rituals or very different ways of kind of existing in the world. And so that was just really, really fun to research. I just spent a lot of time looking around on National Geographic and stuff like that for animals that have different ways of going about things, and kind of thinking which ones would be the most fun to write about, which ones would really speak to Evelyn's situation. So particularly the male seahorses speak to her situation, because she feels that Jamie would be much better as the person to give birth to their child, but that is not possible, at least contemporaneously in our human world. And then she also goes to the super bloom, and I wanted her. The super bloom is the big wildfire flower bloom after a heavy rain in the desert, and I just wanted her to have like a moment of real sublime kind of experience. And she's been working in the tech world. She's so in her mind, and so another arc that she has over the course of the book is really just engaging with the physical world a lot more than kind of just the world of her overthinking and in her mind. So the super bloom, the rest of the nature stuff, a lot of nature stuff happens in Hawaii, especially, is really part of that, is her engaging with the physical world around her and seeing the physical world around her in a different way, and kind of being in her body in a different way. But those are some of my favorite parts to research. I also researched the philosophy a lot. So there were kind of all these different threads of Evelyn's life that had to be researched a lot to make up a person who's, like me, but also not like me, I think, in the end. And you had a question in the back.
Talked about how I think it was the second portion that you are, where that took place during college orientation.
Mm-hmm.
You said that was one of the first things that had like come to you.
Mm-hmm.
So like, did you like write things like kind of linearly, or did you kind of like skip around a lot while writing the book?
It was a great question. Great question. Thank you. So the question was, did I write things linearly or did I skip around while I was writing the book, especially because the second part that I read, I said I wrote first. For the most part, I wrote the book linearly, but I did write that section first. And it's funny because in a way that's still linear because that's kind of it's a memory of hers going back to college. And that's kind of the earliest thing that we get in the book at any point that's happened to her. I never really had thought about it that way until your question. And, it's just cementing early on this relationship between her and Sharky and the way that she's thinking about being half Jewish and half Asian. And that was really something that opened up the book to me because I think I was nervous about writing a narrator, protagonist with that background. It's just so wonderful that it's been received so well and to be somewhere like Temple Sinai talking about it because I really hadn't seen that kind of narrator or that kind of protagonist before. And so I did feel really nervous about whether it would, not if it would work, but if anyone else would ever want to read it or would connect to it. And I think in the kind of years around it coming out, we're starting to see more half Asian narrators and starting to see more talk about how, we have Jews of all races and all ethnicities, but especially growing up, I really didn't kind of have that exposure. So writing that scene really is when I decided that Evelyn was going to be half Asian and half Jewish, and I was going to write the book that I really wanted to write, and that was really meaningful and urgent to me, and I would just see what happened after that. So writing the scene was really kind of liberating for me and decided things for me, and then I kind of went back to the beginning and figured out like what is the situation for Evelyn and what's the arc going to be. And I do think some things might have been a little unlinear, and especially in my mind, kind of going back to the ending, I knew from about halfway what the ending was going to be, but I waited till I got there to write it too. But I know people do all kinds of things. So for me, I'm a linear writer for the most part, with the exception of that scene that never changed throughout the whole, massive revision process of my revisions with my agent, my revisions with my editor. But that scene, which was really like the core in some ways, or the nugget, like stayed the exact same the whole time. Are we? Oh yeah, please. Yeah. 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 The question was, do I still think about Evelyn after writing and think about what would things be like for her? I think definitely yes for a long time. I finished this book in 2019. So it's actually been a while because this is also just how slow publishing is and how slow especially publishing got during COVID lockdown and things like that. And for a debut author, it takes a very long time for the book to come out because they want to set everything up for you to have a good debut. So for years afterward, I think I was having a very hard time getting a new voice, especially. So not necessarily like the way Evelyn, well, it is the way Evelyn thinks about everything, but it's like her voice in particular and her like really dry sense of humor and her really a little bit detached, a little bit anxious, neurotic way of thinking about things. It's like really was in my head and kind of influencing a lot of what I was writing. And I was trying to, my second book is in a different universe than this. So I was trying to also create a narrator who has a different voice than Evelyn, but Evelyn's voice was very strong. In terms of what happens to her, I don't really think about that, actually. I feel like she is in an ambiguous but hopeful place at the end of the book. And I feel really happy with where she is at the end of the book in terms of that, it's not that necessarily everything is going to work out for her for the rest of her life, but that she is in a different place in terms of being able to handle that. She is a strong character for me, and so is Sharky in that sense. So Sharky, as I said, had to be contained. He was in a lot more of the book originally, and it was kind of like a red herring that he was like creating too much plot. But yeah, I guess I would just say I really love Evelyn, and I wish her the best. I hope she is doing okay wherever she is on her journey now. Yeah, I think should we do one more or? Last one? Okay,
It's
yeah.
not really even a
Yeah.
question. I just want to say that I was very happy to see how you had her father grow
Mm-hmm.
and change their relationship to make it more positive
Mm-hmm.
and loving.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing up her father. I'll say something really quickly about it, and I think we're going to break, right, for snacks. But it was just a comment about having her father change and grow also. And I think this is part of the whole conversation we're having here too about what does happiness look like, but also what does love look like, and that there is no one way that love has to look. And Evelyn has been raised, especially in a more Western, she is born in America, but her father was born in Japan. And so he has just a very different way of expressing love than she's kind of been socialized to expect. And they have to kind of come to an understanding with each other over the course of the book too. And his love, he has a new girlfriend. His love for her is this completely different thing to Evelyn also. So yeah, I mean, to me, in some ways, Evelyn has her long-term boyfriend, Jamie, and the book is about their relationship. But in some ways, the more core relationship of the book is her figuring out her relationship with her father and her kind of moving to a different level in their relationship. So thank you for that. I'll show you back to you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. We can give Claire a round of applause. So yeah, as a reminder, there's some light refreshments and books available in the library. And I think Jill has some closing remarks for us as well.
I just want to thank Claire and Tanya for pulling this all together, for Radical Cat making the book available here today. And I did want you to all save the date for April 17th here at Temple Sinai. It'll be a Wednesday evening. Our next bookmark will be entitled Anti-Semitism, Then, There, and Now. It will be co-sponsored by Jewish Nevada, and our moderator will be Mara Langer. And she will be leading a discussion by Elliot Mallon, who's a board member of Jewish Nevada, Dennis Dworkin, who's a professor of history at UNR, and James McSpadden, who is also an assistant professor of history at UNR. So that'll be Wednesday evening, April 17th, here at Temple Sinai. And more information will follow as we get more details with that. There'll be refreshments afterwards, courtesy of Jewish Nevada, so we thank them for that. And we hope you enjoy visiting the biggest little Jewish library in Northern Nevada. Yay, which we've got over 4,000 books here. So if you ever have any questions, feel free to contact us online right through the synagogue website. And if you ever want to support our library with your time and talent, we always welcome volunteers on our committee, and we certainly welcome donations of money and books. So feel free to contact us with that. Special thanks to Radical Cat, and Claire, thank you so much for your afternoon. And Tanya, thank you for pulling this all together. So please join us.
Thank you. Thanks, Tanya. That was a opening question. Oh, thank you. Thanks.